The rain hammered against the windows of David Martinez's small house, like bullets against body armor. He sat in his wheelchair, staring at the flickering television screen. But the late-night news couldn't drown out the memories that haunted him every evening. 6 months had passed since the accident that had ended his career. 6 months since he'd lost everything that mattered to him, his job, his mobility. And worst of all, his partner Max the German Shepherd had been more than just a police dog. For 5 years, they'd worked the streets together, chasing down suspects, finding missing children, sniffing out drugs and explosives. Max had been David's shadow, his protector, his best friend. But when the drunk driver had slammed into David's patrol car, everything had changed in an instant. David's spine had been crushed, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. The department had been sympathetic, of course. They'd covered his medical expenses, given him a pension, even held a ceremony in his honor. But they'd also taken Max away. He needs to work, Chief Morrison had explained. He's too valuable to retire, and you can't handle him anymore. The words still stung. Max had been reassigned to the Henderson family. Good people, Morrison assured him. They had kids who would love him, a big backyard where he could play. It was supposed to be a happy ending, but David knew better. Max wasn't a pet. He was a working dog, bred and trained for a specific purpose. Taking him away from police work was like caging a wild bird. It might survive, but it would never truly live. The scratching at his front door started around midnight at first. David thought it was just the wind rattling the screen, but the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Scratch, 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 a pause. Then again, David wheeled himself toward the door, his heart beginning to race. He wasn't expecting anyone, and in his current condition, unexpected visitors were rarely good news. His service weapon was locked in a safe in his bedroom, too far away to do him any good now. The scratching continued, growing more insistent. David's hand trembled as he reached for the deadbolt. Through the peephole, he could see nothing but darkness and rain. But then, as lightning illuminated the porch, he saw a familiar silhouette. Max. He fumbled with the locks, his fingers suddenly clumsy with excitement and disbelief. The door swung open, and there he was, 70 pounds of wet, muddy German Shepherd. His dark eyes reflecting the porch light. "Oh my God, boy. What are you doing here?" Max didn't jump or wag his tail like a normal dog greeting his owner. Instead, he stepped inside with purpose, shaking the rain from his coat before fixing David with an intense stare. This wasn't a social visit. How did you get here? The Hendersons lived 20 miles away. David closed the door and followed Max into the living room. But the dog didn't settle down on his old favorite spot by the couch. Instead, he paced nervously, occasionally stopping to look at David with what seemed like urgency. "What is it, boy? What's wrong?" Max walked to the hallway that led to David's old home office, then stopped and looked back. When David didn't immediately follow, the dog returned and gently gripped the wheelchair's armrest in his teeth, tugging. "You want me to follow you?" Max released his grip and headed down the hallway again. David wheeled after him, his pulse quickening. Max's behavior was triggering memories of their time together on the force. This was how the dog acted when he'd found something important, controlled, focused, determined. The office had been David's sanctuary before the accident. Boxes of old case files lined the walls, awards and commendations hung crooked on the wall, and his old uniform jacket still draped the back of his desk chair. He hadn't been in here since coming home from the hospital. It hurt too much. Max went straight to a stack of file boxes in the corner. The ones David had brought home from his final case, the one that had been interrupted by his accident. The dog sat in front of the boxes and gave a sharp bark. "Those old files?" "Max, what are you?" David's voice trailed off as he noticed something. Max wasn't just sitting near the boxes. He was in his alert position, the precise stance he'd been trained to take when he detected drugs or explosives. David's hands shook as he opened the first box. Inside were dozens of evidence bags, photographs. and reports from what should have been a routine drug bust. But the case had never been closed. David had been on his way to arrest the main suspect when the drunk driver had hit him. Max whined and pawed at a specific evidence bag. David lifted it out, a small plastic bag containing a cell phone that had been confiscated from one of the suspects. He'd never had a chance to examine it thoroughly. "What about this phone, boy?" Max barked once, his signal for yes during their working days. David's heart pounded as he remembered the night of his accident. He'd been rushing to make an arrest based on a tip from his informant. The suspect was supposedly about to skip town with a major drug shipment. But what if he found his old laptop buried under a stack of papers and powered it up? His hands were steady now, muscle memory taking over as he fell back into detective mode. If Max was alerting on this phone, there was something here. Something important. The phone had been processed for prints and DNA. But David realized he'd never checked the call log thoroughly. As he scrolled through the data, one number appeared repeatedly, including a call made just hours before David's accident. David dialed the number from his landline. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered, Detective Stevens speaking. David's blood turned to ice. Stevens had been his partner before Max, before David had requested a transfer to the K-9 unit. They'd had a falling out over Stevens' increasingly questionable methods and suspicious wealth. "Stevens, it's David Martinez." A long pause. "David, Jesus, I heard about your accident. How are you doing? I'm calling about the Morales case. The drug bust from 6 months ago." Another pause, longer this time. "That case was closed after your accident." "Nothing came of it. That's funny because I'm looking at evidence that suggests otherwise, including phone records showing multiple calls between you and the main suspect." The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Stevens finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. "You should let sleeping dogs lie. David, you've been through enough." The line went dead. David stared at the phone, his mind racing. Stevens had been in charge of the investigation after David's accident. If he was dirty, he would have had the perfect opportunity to bury the case and destroy evidence. Max pressed his head against David's hand, a gesture of comfort the dog had always made when David was stressed. But this time, it felt different. It felt like a reminder that David wasn't alone. "You knew, didn't you, boy? Somehow you knew." David spent the next 3 hours going through every piece of evidence in the box with new eyes. Max stayed by his side, occasionally alerting on specific items, a photograph of a warehouse, financial records showing suspicious deposits, witness statements that had been buried in the file by dawn. David had reconstructed the entire conspiracy. Stevens hadn't just been taking bribes from drug dealers. He'd been actively protecting their operations, feeding them information about police raids, even arranging for evidence to disappear. The night of David's accident hadn't been random. He'd been getting close to the truth, and Stevens had tipped off the dealers. The drunk driver who'd hit him had been released without charges, despite having a blood alcohol level twice the legal limit. David pulled up the accident report and found Stevens' signature all over the paperwork. His accident hadn't been an accident at all. David reached for his phone to call the FBI, then hesitated. Stevens still had friends in the department. If word got back to him that David was investigating, there was no telling what he might do. Max seemed to sense his uncertainty. The dog walked to the closet and nosed open the door, revealing David's old bulletproof vest hanging inside. "You think I should suit up for this, boy?" Max barked once. David looked at himself in the mirror hanging on the office wall. 6 months ago, he'd been a decorated police officer with 15 years of experience. The wheelchair didn't change that. The paralysis didn't erase his training or his instincts. And he had something Stevens didn't expect, a partner who could sniff out lies. Better than any human, he called FBI agent Sarah Chen, a contact from his days working joint task forces. She answered on the second ring. "Agent Chen, this is David Martinez with Metro PD. I have information about a corruption case involving Detective James Stevens. I'm listening." David spent 20 minutes laying out everything he'd discovered. Chen asked sharp questions, took detailed notes, and promised to have agents at his house within the hour. David, she said before hanging up, how did you know to look at this evidence again? David looked down at Max, who was now lying peacefully by his wheelchair, his job complete. Let's just say I had help from an old partner. 2 hours later, David's house was filled with FBI agents, forensics experts, and federal prosecutors. Stevens was arrested at his home, along with 3 other corrupt officers and a network of drug dealers who'd been operating with police protection for years. Chief Morrison arrived as the FBI was packing up the evidence. David, I owe you an apology. About Max, about everything. The department made a mistake. David scratched Max behind the ears. Feeling whole for the first time in months, the department made several mistakes, Chief. But Max helped me fix one of them. Morrison looked confused. Max, how did dogs have better instincts than humans sometimes. They know when something doesn't smell right, even when we've convinced ourselves to look the other way. Agent Chen approached with a folder in her hand. David, we could use your help with this case. We need someone with your experience and instincts, someone who can't be corrupted or intimidated. David felt a familiar surge of purpose. The same feeling he'd had every morning when he'd pinned on his badge. What about my condition? The FBI has an excellent civilian consultant program. You'd be working cold cases, corruption investigations, things that require detective work rather than foot chases, and she glanced at Max. We could use a good K9 consultant too. David looked down at Max, who was watching him with those intelligent brown eyes. The dog had risked everything to bring him this information. Had somehow known that David needed not just the truth, but a reason to keep fighting. I'll need to make sure Max's living situation is properly resolved. Chief Morrison cleared his throat. Actually, the Henderson family called this morning. Max had been acting out ever since the placement, not eating, not sleeping, not responding to commands. They said he seemed depressed. They're willing to return him to the department, and the department is willing to return him to you, Morrison continued. Medical retirement with full benefits, and you can keep your partner. It should have been done that way from the beginning. David felt tears welling up in his eyes as he reached down to hug Max. The dog's tail finally wagged, a full body wiggle of pure joy. What do you say, partner, ready to get back to work? Max barked once. Sharp and clear. 3 months later, David sat in his new office at the FBI field office. Max curled up on a dog bed. Beside his desk, on the wall hung his old service photos alongside his new federal credentials. His wheelchair was equipped with everything he needed to be mobile and effective. The Morales case had unraveled completely, leading to 47 arrests and the seizure of $12 million. In drug money, Stevens was looking at 30 years in federal prison. The drunk driver who'd hit David had been revealed as one of Stevens' informants, paid to create the accident that would have silenced David permanently. Agent Chen knocked on his door frame. We've got a new case, Martinez, cold case murder from 2 years ago. Local PD thinks it might be connected to corruption in the prosecutor's office. David looked down at Max, who was already standing, ears alert. What do you think, boy? Ready to sniff out some more truth? Max's tail wagged as he moved to David's side, assuming the position he'd held for 5 years, partner, protector, and the best detective David had ever worked with. Some bonds, David realized, couldn't be broken by accidents, bureaucracy, or even attempted murder. They could only be made stronger. As they headed out on their first official case together in over 6 months, David felt something he hadn't experienced since before his accident, complete confidence in his ability to do the job he was born to do. And beside him, Max walked with the purposeful gait of a working dog who knew exactly where he belonged. The night visitor had brought more than just evidence. He'd brought redemption, justice, and the reminder that some partnerships are strong enough to survive anything. Even on For Wheels and For Paws, they were still the best team Metro PD had ever produced. And now, They had a whole new arena in which to prove it.